So the questions that I have kind of go from your background, your military experiences, and then maybe a little bit about after you were out of the.
You wish.
Okay. So were you drafted or did you enlist?
I think everybody in the Navy was an enlistment.
Okay.
Yep. I was registered for the draft, and I had been called to take my physical in my senior year in February. And I passed it, and I went up to the draft board and I asked them, I said, I'm going to graduate in June. You going to give me an extension? He said, did you pass? And I said, yes. He said, you'll be gone in 2 weeks. I said, I didn't know I was so important to the service. And I went out, slammed the door, had a big glass in, you know how commercial, and the glass all fell to the floor, and I kept walking. I never went back there, so I don't know if they fixed it or what, but I went across the street to the courthouse and asked a friend of the family who was an elected official there. I said, I need a letter of recommendation for the military. And told him I was going to enlist in the Navy and try and be a pilot. And I said, I'm going up to my dad's office, and I'll be back down in 15, 20 minutes. Hope you'll be ready with it. And I did the same thing to a couple banks, and went up to my dad's office, told him what I was going to do, and I said I didn't want to be a foot soldier. I said I want clean sheets and hot meals. And I came back, got those recommendations, and went over to highway, stuck my thumb out, and went back to school. And then I went over to Peoria, take a Navy physical, do the preliminary paperwork, passed that, and they gave me a ticket to St. Louis to finish up. I got down to St. Louis. There were, I suppose, 500 guys down there. You know, 2 of us passed, me and one other guy. And we both made a deal with the Navy to finish college. And I never saw that guy again, but they asked me when I'd graduate, and I told them the 8th of June, and sure enough, they let me stay. And the 10th, I was in uniform, got a haircut and everything.
So when you say you were going to school, where were you going to school at the time?
Close to where you're at, apparently, Illinois State.
That's where you were going to school? No.
Illinois Wesleyan.
Okay. And what was your major? What were you majoring in at the time?
Girls? No. No, I was a Jewish engineering. You know what that is?
No.
Business management.
Okay. So you were in business management. And do you think that any of your skills from that helped you when you were in the Navy?
Not.
No?
No. Just like learn to fly didn't help me much after either.
Okay.
But, no, I became a banker, so I think it probably helped.
Do you remember your boot camp or training experiences?
I was in the 2nd class of what we jokingly called the muscle factory. They had what they called pre-flight school, and you got 3 months of naval science and training along the Navy and navigation and semaphore and whatnot. And, they had different colleges. I got to go to Iowa State out here, and a friend of mine went to Carolina, Chapel Hill, and I had a brother-in-law that became a Navy pilot also. And he went to California, and a couple guys that were friends of mine in Morris, where I came from, went to Norman, Oklahoma, and so on.
Okay.
But it was the second class, and you had half a day of ground school,
Okay.
and the other half was muscle. You know, you did everything, rope climbing, wrestling, and they even boxed until a couple guys got a black eye, and then they didn't think that was a good idea because he might not have good eyesight after that. You do need that flying.
So did you have any interest in aviation, or had you ever flown a plane or ridden in a plane prior to?
Once.
One time.
Remember the old barnstormers
Yep.
that used to come around, fly out of a farmer's field,
Mm-hmm.
take you in an open cockpit biplane for
Yep.
$5 and go around town and once.
One time.
Mhm.
Do you recall, did somebody take you there, or it was just a plane that?
No, my dad took me out in the country, and
Okay.
they were next, you know, our fields were right next to the city limits back then. But, no, that was the only time I'd been near.
So you knew nothing when
No.
you went in, and you
Yeah,
pretty
right.
much started from.
I didn't know stick and rudder. I thought they had a steering wheel like a car.
So pretty much you learned it all. And
I-
how many weeks of training was that?
After 3 months in the muscle factory, I got sent to primary down St. Louis, Lambert Field, and we flew those biplanes, open cockpits, and we had 2 or 3 types. The steerman was primary, and then the N3N, which was made by the Navy, was plentiful. And then later on, they got some NPs, which I think were called Spartans back then. And if you landed with one wing low, the dang thing stayed that way. I mean, they had the softest oleos, but it had a metal wingtip too. You must have had too many guys that cracked them.
So that was what you trained on when you were
Right.
there. So about 3 months of training,
And then got moved to Pensacola and got into low-wing monoplanes with fixed gear and crank flaps, and then it went into AT6 and SNJ, they call it Texan, and got another name I've forgotten, but it was quite plentiful in the Air Force and the Navy both, and a lot of them still flying. And, that had an automatic landing gear, and you had automatic flaps, and you had controllable pitch prop, and you had a 30 caliber synchronized through the propeller. Sometimes it did go through the propeller. You'd hear it whistle after that.
So really, before you went to Pensacola, I mean, you didn't know very much at all.
Not much about airplanes.
Yeah. Were you?
Well, they didn't even have one on the base, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you fearful about? I mean, or you didn't know enough to maybe be?
No, I was too dumb to. I suppose I was scared. I think you stay a little scared, and maybe you stay a little healthier too. Then.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, when you fly fighters, back then they were all one place, and you talked about it with the pilot that is telling you about how to fly it and that, and you do a cockpit checkout and blindfold instrument and that, and then he helps you start the airplane, and then he gets off the wing and he says, "I'll be right behind you." And you're all alone.
Yeah.
First time, you know.
Scary, I bet.
And when I flew jets, it was the same thing. In there alone, the first time. Well, you know, you almost have a brown streak in your shorts.
You're gonna find out if you can do it or not.
Yeah.
Well, you have to do it. And especially when I was flying jets, the book doesn't tell you everything. And the guy instructing you doesn't tell you everything. And I think it's not intentional. I think it's easy to just feel everybody knows. Have you ever been up in a jet?
No.
We were up 30,000 feet, and he says, pull back on the stick, stall, stall. Well, you can't stall a jet, you know that. And prop airplane, you pull it back far enough and stall it, and it whips, you know, and then goes the other way, and then it spirals. But a jet just sinks, and it'll show you're doing 250 and you aren't moving, you're just going down. And you don't feel that either. But the guy that is telling you to pull back, pull back, pull back, he says, look at your altimeter. Well, the altimeter's going down. And sure enough. So I just rolled it over and dived for the deck, and all of a sudden, just like somebody shaking talcum powder, and then it frosts over like the inside of a refrigerator, all that rime ice on there. And of course I reach up, figure I can just scrape that off. No. So what do? You flip the heat on. And of course, jets, air conditioner or heat, and I had stayed with the air conditioner. Even at 30,000 you need it, because that engine is turning up 1,800 degrees centigrade, not Fahrenheit, but centigrade. And of course that melted off just like that. But that's the only time I ever had that problem.
Yeah, and you remembered. So maybe they had you doing certain things so you'd learn it, you know.
But nobody told me, and it's not in the book.
So did you have any other close calls or memorable experiences during your training besides that?
Not particularly.
Okay. Were there pilots there that did not make it through the part at Pensacola that just...
You kill a few, and yeah, you had guys. We did night flying, of course, and you did spot landings, and you did a series of landings. You just keep circling the field and land, take off, land, take off. Somebody'd land on top of somebody and kill him. And, you just lose one heck of a lot of people.
So what was the toughest thing during training for you personally, do you think?
I don't remember anything.
Nothing
really tough.
Yeah.
Probably instrument flying, and put you under the hood, and you're up there, don't know where you are, but you're keeping your balance. And all of a sudden, he says, well, it's time to go home. He says, pop the hood. And you pop the hood, and here you are like inside of a cloud, you know. Oh, it was foggy, and we'd been up there and that. And I said, we're not up here alone. There's 10 or 15 other guys. I hope you picked an area we belong to. But we never ran into anybody, so.
Were you using radios during all this time too to communicate with each other? Okay.
Yeah. You didn't have radio in the old biplane.
Right.
And you had what they called a gosport, and everything was lights from the tower, red or green.
Like looking for a beacon or,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, how do you think you got through this time? What was something that helped you especially to get through this pretty rigorous training? Was there anything special?
I don't remember anything being too tough.
I think you mentioned you were in the Pacific as well. So
Pacific South.
which areas were you in combat in?
Started in at the Philippines at Lady Gulf, and then from there on up through Tokyo. And from the Philippines, we went through the various islands in the Philippines, Luzon and Leyte and Samar and Mindoro and Mindanao. And then we went over to China and Hong Kong and Canton, and then to Vietnam. Now it was French Indochina then, and Camaran Bay and up the Mekong River and shooting up gunboats and that. And it was fun.
So you were aboard the USS Yorktown.
Yorktown.
See by your hat there.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, Yorktown #2, which was number 10. Number 5 was sunk at Midway, which was just before we got out there.
and they recommissioned it because it was the anniversary or something, right? Was that
This was supposed to be, I think, the Bonhomme Richard.
okay?
But, because the York had been sunk, why, they switched and named it. And of course, it was the second one of the Essex class carriers. Essex was number 9, and Yorktown 10, and Wasp 11, and Hornet 12, and Franklin 13, and so on.
So what was it like being on an aircraft carrier like the USS Yorktown?
Just like a city. You had 3,500 people on that,
Wow.
and it was 875 feet long, 75 feet off the water. And you had about 300 pilots on there. We had 105 in the fighter squadron, and we lost 31 out there, the majority of them to accidents, and the rest of them to anti-aircraft fire. We did not lose a single pilot to an enemy pilot, and we shot 91 enemy aircraft down. And the ship with its various squadrons shot over 400 down, and of course Air Group 5 was ahead of us, and Air Group 9 was behind us, and then 88 was behind them, so that was divided up among everybody. We only had one pilot that became an ace. He shot 5 down in one day.
Wow.
And,
Do you recall what particular battle that was, or where you
no,
were?
I
No,
don't.
just 5 in
He
one.
wasn't flying with me. Another guy and I shared, we both had been shooting at him. We shot the first one down that the air group got credit for, and he and I got half each.
Wow. So this was Air Group 3, as
Air
you kind
Group
of were
3.
telling us before. Okay.
Right. And this guy died last August, 99 and a half years old.
Wow.
And he was quite a photographer. He lived down near Padre Island, and he used to go to the, what did they call it, Miss Universe?
I think so, yeah.
He has some beautiful pictures.
So you stayed in touch with him then, pretty
Oh,
much,
yeah.
after the service, and
We had a good bunch of boys. Most of us that were left, we had a reunion every odd year from the beginning through, I think it was 97, the last one. And I think I engineered the next last one up at Chicago, and we had a couple guys that had never come before came to that.
Wow.
And one of our guys became an admiral, and he came to that last reunion. It's the only one he ever attended. And he was in charge of a carrier over in Vietnam. And so that's why they teach you navigation and celestial navigation, and teach you semaphores. And, you had to learn flags also, and of course you forget all that stuff.
So what, as far as memorable experiences during combat, anything that you'd like to share? Anything specific that happened?
As I said earlier, when those tracers go flying by, you know there's something in between. We always loaded armor-piercing, incendiary, and tracer, 1, 2, 3. And you carried 650 rounds of 50 caliber for 6 guns. You had fired in pairs. You had 2, 4, or 6. And I always shot 4 and saved the other 2 to come back to the ship on. And of course you had to find the ship, and nice if it's where it's supposed to be, but it never is, because it's gonna hide in a squall someplace, and it'll be within 20 miles of where it's supposed to be. But you know, you always are short on fuel coming back.
Any lights?
Pardon?
Any lights
Lights?
on the boat?
No, no lights. No lights on you or the boat. You know, when you take off, it's pre-dawn, 4:30, you get to the target at daylight, and they launch you about 250 miles away, so they'll be safe. And you go into the target on the water, load and stay under radar, and then when you get close, you climb up to 12,000, 14,000. And when you come back at 12 or 14, and then you dive down to find the ship. And of course you're on the homing device all the time, and you're changing attitude following that signal. And like a piece of pie, it's big out here and keeps narrowing down. And as you narrow down, well, you have to change direction because you'd be floating into another signal. And when you start to pick up the other signal, you know which side of your signal it's on, and every day they change that. And so you get that when you're working your navigation before your launch.
So was it just you on the airplane? You were by yourself, or did you have? So you were responsible for everything.
You fly in a division of 4, and there's 2 sections. So there's 2 airplanes stay together all the time.
Okay.
And you maybe have 4 divisions go out on a sortie, and that'd be 16 aircraft. But each division leader, whoever it is for that day, is responsible for the direction and bringing your pilots back to.
So did you ever lead? Did you ever lead those missions?
Yeah,
Or okay.
Occasionally.
Yeah. So did you ever have any situations where you couldn't find the USS Yorktown when you were coming back, and it was pretty scary?
I've had situations where it wasn't where I hoped it would be.
Yeah.
But it was reasonably close. And of course, you just climb back up and start picking up the signal again and fly in. But no, a different guy would be leading. And one time we were going into target, and I don't remember where it was, but the weather was always something. It's going to rain somewhere, you know, and whether you're going through it or it misses you, but it comes right down on the water out there, and you're trying to stay under it. Well, they get to the point where you can't, and you go through it, and you start climbing, and you don't know when you're going to come out on top. But we were in the middle of that with 4 airplanes, and the other guy was leading, and for some reason he started circling, and no reason to, because you're still 100 miles from where you're going, but take 4 airplanes and start circling in the clouds and the rain, and pretty soon somebody tightens up too much and your gyros tumble, and all of a sudden he passes the lead to me. Well, my gyro had tumbled before him because I was flying on him, and I would tighten up more to stay on him than he would. And so I leveled the airplane and got it in one position, you know, and not climbing, not doing anything, just trying to level, and got needle ball airspeed and caged my gyros, and when I got level and that and knew it, then I uncaged them, and then I turned to the heading that we had been on to the target. I figured if I'm using gas, I might just as well be going where I'm supposed to go. And it was 14,000 feet before we came out, and all 4 of us were there, and then we hit the target. But that was interesting.
So out of the places that you mentioned that you know, ran sorties or did missions to, was there one in particular that you did not like going to?
Well, we covered Ewo, and it was about 2,500 foot ceiling at that time. And of course the boats coming into land, the Marines, one after another, and we were shooting up the anti-aircraft placements, and we were dropping napalms. The only time we ever did napalm, we'd put those in that cave, you know, and burn them out. They'd come out on fire. Didn't run far. But the U.S. lost 6,000 people in one day, and you don't forget that. But anti-aircraft shells were shaking the airplane and rattling the canopy, and you know that they're close when they're doing that. And when you got a ceiling, they know right where to go, and all they got to do is line up with you. And of course, when you're doing 250, well, you change position pretty quick. So they were either off a little to the left or right, or a little behind us, you know. But too close for comfort.
So is that plane shaking and
It'll shake,
rocking and rolling the whole time trying to get through all that?
It'll shake the airplane if it's 100 feet away. Yeah. And of course that shrapnel flies, you get a hole here and there, but as long as it's small ones. But the airplane will fly with a hole that big.
As long as you got fuel.
In the wing or in the fuselage, as long as it doesn't cut a wire or that.
Were you ever wounded during your time in the service?
No. Pretty lucky.
Yeah, very lucky.
I'm still pretty lucky. I'm still here.
So what instructions did they give
At
you?
39.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
39, that's right.
Mhm.
So what instructions did they give you as far as if you were shot down, what was the procedure? What were you supposed to do?
Be different for every place. Of course, 9 times out of 10 you'd be in the water, and of course they'd know you were between the ship and the target somewhere, and there's a submarine out there somewhere too. And when you go into the target, you contact the submarine, and he surfaces enough to get the antenna up, and you can see the wash of the antenna, and he responds to your call and lets you know that he's heard you and that he's there, and you answer back when you see him, and hopefully you don't need him. We only had one guy go down, and he went down in the Philippines, and of course the guerrillas picked him up and took him to a home. What did they call them? Burial back then, was it? I think. But this guy was being taken out the back door when the Japs were coming in the front door, and when he got back to us, the submarine brought him to a destroyer, and the destroyer put him back on the carrier. He said, I wondered if those kids would say something, but not a one did. It took 3 days for him to get back to us.
But he got back.
Mhm.
That's good.
But he's the only one we had that way. We had one go down in the water, and we circled him, and he died about 3 or 4 years ago, and he was from Georgia, which Georgia people are different than the rest of us, I think. And he was from a plantation family, and well-to-do and that, and he always was, like most Southerners, not particularly nice to the black people. They are used to being served by them and not being nice particularly. But he was a good pilot, but he was a poor swimmer, and he didn't get his raft out from, you're sitting on your parachute, and your raft is on top of that, and then you've got a little soft cushion, at least somebody thought it was. It's not very soft.
Not too much,
after, not after 4 or 5 hours, But he didn't get his raft, and so we slid ours out from under and would circle him and drop it. And of course, being a poor swimmer, had his Mae West, that's your life jacket. They call it Mae West for some reason. But most of us used an Air Force Mae West, which is a little thinner. The Navy one surrounds you more and probably would hold you up more, but it's hotter too, and you don't need that
You
much.
probably don't have as much mobility and things like that.
No.
Yeah.
Of course, it isn't blown up. You got the CO2 bottles that you pull to blow it up. But this guy dog paddled to swim, and he finally did get one of the rafts that bounced around and finally bumped him in the head again, and he blew it up. But he was the only other one that ended up in the water, other than the ones that intentionally landed alongside where they couldn't get wheels down, or hydraulic problems, and that land alongside the carrier, and the destroyer picks you up and when they bring you back, they want 5 gallons of ice cream. And if you don't have the ice cream ready, they don't deliver the pilot.
That's wild. So when did you start having helicopters up when you started landing on aircraft carriers?
Have what?
Helicopters up when you were landing on
There
aircraft
weren't
carriers?
any choppers out there with us.
Never ever?
No, they came along after. No choppers.
Submarines only.
So when you were on the Yorktown, how many? I mean, would you go out for missions every day?
There were missions every day from the ship. You might not be engaged in it, but you had to serve as duty officer occasionally, which would be to count the airplanes and see what's up and get the number count and assign them to the various airplane drivers.
So were you on days when you weren't on a mission?
Yeah.
You were doing that,
no
or
duties.
no duties?
Unless
You weren't expected to help with anything with the
No.
aircraft, or?
No.
So what did you do on your days off? Did you write letters back home? Did you keep in touch with people, or?
On your day off, you probably write at night or that, or play poker or that. Of course, we had ample supply of alcohol, which was not generally known. But they had what they called cruise boxes, and they were about as big as what he's sitting on over there, and made out of wood. And you brought your stuff aboard in that, and you had a couple suitcases that were small, like a valise or that, like an overnight case, but you didn't need much clothes, and so consequently all you had was khakis, and of course it was hot everywhere. But some guys played poker. You could win or lose 40,000 in one night. Yeah.
That kind of money?
Back then.
Well,
Guys shoot crap. You'd tighten the blanket on your bunk and you'd shoot crap on the blanket and it would just bounce.
You sound like you did that a few times.
I had a roommate who was a good crap shooter, and he was a good drinker too. He couldn't read the dice, so I'd read them for him.
So did you ever get the opportunity to see magazines from back home, or newspapers, or listen to music from back home while you were?
You had a library and of course books and that, but you didn't have magazines particularly, and mail, I don't know, probably every 2 or 3 weeks we got mail. We'd come back to resupply the fleet to a lagoon area off of the Philippines called Ulithi, and Ulithi Atoll. All the natives had been moved off of the islands which we were using, and it actually was the top of a volcano. And there was one island called Mogmog, which had the recreational bar on, and it was the only thing that was under canvas, and you couldn't, other than be at the bar long enough to get your drink, and then you'd move on because somebody else would be there, and you'd be out from under the tent, and 9 times out of 10, every 15 minutes it would rain. And if you had a glass of beer half full, it would rain enough to fill that glass for you with rain.
Monsoon
So you
dump.
pitch that and go get another one. But, no, you were soaking wet.
So what was the food like on the USS Yorktown?
Good.
It was pretty good?
Except for breakfast, one of the guys that I always breakfast with liked a 2-minute boiled egg. And they served it in a little cup, you know, like that. And officers had to go through the line and didn't get served at the table. You took it to the table, and he'd crack that, and out had come a feather. Of course, they were storage eggs, and I'd look at that, and he'd take it back and get another one, but I said, you're gonna have to start having breakfast with somebody else, because I'm tired of seeing feathers.
But it was pretty good food.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
life aboard that aircraft carrier was pretty decent, it sounds like.
Well, as I said, my mama didn't raise a total dummy. That's why I wanted clean sheets and warm food. I spent 3 days on a destroyer during the typhoon, and that ship rolled 54 degrees, which is pretty far. It's supposed to keep rolling at 45, so we were lucky we didn't sink. The captain never left the bridge in those 3 days. He was up there the whole time. And he called when we rolled that much, he says, all hands to the starboard side. I was holding on to an I-beam up there, laying on up there like I was laying on the floor. It was that far. I thought it was going to keep rolling.
Do you recall what destroyer that was?
No, I don't remember the name. The captain always reminded me of the movie star Eric Bloor.
I've heard the name, but yeah.
You know, he's sort of a big jowled guy and a little rotund, but I thought he did a damn good job. Kept us from rolling. There were 3 cans that broke up. There were 800 personnel lost in that because of those destroyers breaking up. And we spent a couple days looking for survivors, and us pilots.
Search and rescues? Search and rescue?
Yep, we did searches for them. You'd find bodies, but they wouldn't go get them. They said, anybody moving? No. Go on.
Yeah.
So how many missions total did you fly during the?
The Navy doesn't count them.
No?
No. You'd fly maybe twice a day, and maybe not the next day, and maybe the next. You had 4 or 5 hour flight every time, so if you take off before daylight or 4 o'clock in the morning or that, you've got a long day. We had that picture in the middle there. We had 36 airplanes to begin with, and I think 48 pilots. And they increased us to 54 planes, and of course 72 pilots. And then they increased us to 72 airplanes and 105 pilots. And then they divided us into 2 squadrons, and so half of each, but we always, knew each other more or less, so we always ended up thinking of us as one yet. And they transfer guys in, transfer guys out. Some of them you hardly got to know, but the original 48, we were pretty close the whole time. And the ones that came in, some of them you'd get attached to, and some of them you just flew with. But,
What about medals or citations? Were you awarded or issued any of those during your
I
time?
got 2 air medals and a Distinguished Flying Cross for all the shooting up I did. Airplanes shot down, the airplanes damaged, in the air and on the ground, and shooting up trains and boats and troop transports.
So they keep track of how many enemy planes that you shot down?
There's always got to be collaborated by somebody else. And, we shot 91 down.
So when you were flying a lot of these missions, the places that you mentioned, would that have been, that was, I mean, right up until the spring and summer of 1945, right? Was there a kind of an impending sense that the war was going to end soon, or did you feel that?
Well, when you get close to Tokyo, it ought to be ending, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
Of course, when we knew we were going to hit Tokyo, they had one hell of a lot of anti-aircraft around there, and our recovery zone was right over some of their anti-aircraft, and the skipper, he says, I'm going to ask for volunteers for this flight because I don't think we're going to, all of us, come back because of all that recovery area. And every hand went up, and he didn't have a problem. But we were lucky. The atomic bombs got dropped before that took off, and we didn't fly that particular mission. But we were over Tokyo with just different approaches and that.
So by that time in Tokyo, what were your main targets in those final missions? Okay.
Factories.
So trying to destroy anything that they still had left?
Anything that had to do with military. And primarily, every place that was the thing. You were either trains or convoys or ships in the harbor or ships in and out of the harbor, and aircraft emplacements. When we hit Manila, they said, leave the hotel alone. That's going to be our headquarters when we get back there. Well, we came over Manila, and they had gun emplacements on the roof of the hotel, and they were shooting the hell out of us. And so we put a lot of holes in the roof of that hotel.
So do you remember where you were at when you heard that the war was over officially?
On my way home, I guess. Yorktown wasn't ready to leave, and we were, and the Lexington, which would be just like it, was due to come back, but its air group wasn't.
Okay.
So we went over onto the Lexington to come home with them, and their air group came over and took our place.
Okay.
And that's the way it worked.
So you probably heard that the war was over when you were on the Lexington then?
By the time we got home, yeah.
So was that common that a whole group would come in together and leave together then, right?
Yeah.
So you guys all left at the same time. So when you came back home, where did you go? Did you come back to Illinois?
I had 30 days leave, and then I was reformed for VF3 to go out again. And of course, the war was not over yet then, and we reformed in Atlantic City, and that was in May, and of course the war wasn't over until August. And when August came, we were in Oceana, Virginia, which would be just off of Norfolk, and it's still active, and it's a jet fighter base now. And I flew out of there in jets after the war. I stayed in the reserve for 10 years after, and that's when I flew jets.
And you did, I'm assuming you probably did a lot of training and things during that time?
We had guys go to Korea, and
Okay.
I didn't have to, but a lot of our guys did.
So you went from, biplane
Through jets, yeah,
to jets.
all the way through. See, I flew Hellcats, and in training for fighters, for combat type, believe it or not, I flew the Brewster Buffalo, which was the F-2A, and it was obsolete at that time. And the Navy had sold the majority of those to the Dutch for $2 a piece, $2 a piece. And it was a 1,100 horse and a nice airplane. There's one of the models up there. The Brewster Buffalo. I think it's the end one, isn't it? It should say,
Yep.
got your specs on?
Yep. $2?
$2. It was a little bigger than that. No, 1,100 horse, and it was about the same size as the Bearcat. And I don't think I have a Bearcat. They're hard to get.
Did you fly those as well?
I flew Bearcats,
Okay.
yeah.
And then there was the Corsair that,
Corsairs, I flew. This is a Corsair.
okay.
And this small one on this end is a Corsair.
But they probably weren't using many of the Corsairs in combat.
On the ground.
Okay,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, they weren't too suitable for aircraft.
Yeah, that's what I'd
because
read.
The prop, and it came in with that long nose, you couldn't see the deck. Corsair flies just about like the Hellcat. And the Bearcat is smaller but the same engine, and you're sitting closer to it. And when you start it, it shoots flame the whole side, so you've got to keep the, and sitting closer to the engine, you get 100 degrees or better in the cockpit, so you're nice and damp. Don't smell good either.
So after
You're too agreeable.
after the military, did you keep flying at all?
Yes, as I said, I was in the reserve for
Mhm.
10 years, so every month I was a weekend up at Glenview, and then at least 2 weeks a year. And the squadron would either fly out of Glenview for 2 weeks, or they would send you to California or Pennsylvania or Virginia, or never to Honolulu. And when we got jets, why, I was still at the F-8. First the Hellcat, then the Corsair, then the Bearcat, and then the Panther jet, and then the Cougar jet. So I went through all those.
So what was your favorite to fly? Or it depended on the situation, really?
Oh, I guess I liked them all.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, you like what you're flying. Yeah. they always called the Corsair Whistling Death. It was the same engine as the others, but it just had a different sound, and you didn't hear it until it was there, and that's why they called it Whistling Death. But,
Amazing.
when we were flying out of Atlantic City, there was a nudist colony along the river near there, and when you take off at 140 degrees, which would be southwest, it was in the direction to that nudist colony. So we'd stay low, and then we'd dip down in the riverbed, and with that Corsair, the nudists didn't run until we were there. And of course, they thought we were going to see more than we did, because 250 miles an hour would go by pretty fast.
Just to see him scattering. Just to see him scattering.
I'm sorry you weren't with us.
Oh, you know, I could just say it doesn't matter what guys are doing. It just doesn't matter. They'll figure a way.
We used to come down over the beach low, and you could blow sand in somebody's lunch too.
So how was it surfing the water?
The surf,
When you're flying the planes, how's it surfing on the water down real low like that?
well, you almost feel like you're swimming.
Right?
We get down there, sure. Yeah.
Could you feel it? Like, was it different that you're down there? Did you like know, or?
You have a sense of speed when you're down low. When you're up, you don't do. But no, you'd come down over that, and of course you'd
Send
do
it.
slow rolls.
Yep.
With
Having
the
fun.
jet, why, you could snap that stick about that much, and she'd just keep spinning.
Have some fun.
Oh, it was. Yeah.
So what do you think the most important thing for today's students to know about World War II or the war in the Pacific where you were at?
I think there was, and probably always is, a lot of camaraderie, and you're trusting your life to the guy next to you, and you hope that he trained as well as you did, and everybody's supposed to do the same thing the same way, and you count on that. And your life is actually in the other guy's hands as much as his is in yours. So you can't help but think he's a pretty good guy. This guy and I flew together most of the time. We were in the same division in BF3, and he happened to stay in the Navy and became a captain, and when he retired, he went with a charter airline service called World Airways, and he flew for them all over the world, charter flights. He had a heart attack in Africa, and they sent a plane to pick he up and brought his wife to Africa, and they took him to Germany to a hospital, and then later flew both of them back home. And of course he got grounded after that with a heart attack, and he became their operations officer. And that lady that he was married to and I still correspond. She lives in California, and she had been an airline flight attendant, and he had met her on her flight a couple of times and then married her.
And they are?
And they had a boy and a girl. And the girl and my oldest girl became friends at one time. Of course, they've been apart a long time too, but both of them are still alive and know of each other. This group is the ones I flew with up at Glenview in the reserve, and that's an F-8, a Bearcat behind us, and as far as I know, they're all gone. The one on the end here, I ran into a niece of his one time. I happened to be working at a convenience store in Dwight, which was owned by a longtime friend of mine, and I waited on a lady who had gotten fuel, and I recognized the name on her credit card, and I asked about it, if she knew this man who was the same name, and she says, that was my uncle. He died a couple of years ago, and that was the only one I ever came close to running into afterwards. But a couple of these were from Wisconsin, and a couple of them were airline pilots, and one of them I think was still in college. But we all enjoyed the Bearcat. This is Felix the Cat in the Navy, and it started in 1924, and it's currently used by BF-31, which is an active squadron today. This is the Yorktown as it looks today with the canted deck. When jets came along, of course, you had to have a way of getting them off if they didn't hook. And while we had 8 wires with a straight deck and barriers, they have the slanted deck, 3 wires to catch, and if you don't catch, you take off with the canted deck. You couldn't take off with a prop plane because you had parked aircraft on the front end. And if you floated over the barrier, had too much speed, you'd land on top of the parked ones, and of course there were personnel there as well, and you'd kill a few people. So you always just dug into the deck and they kept the barriers up.
What is the wood? What is the wood?
What is this? This happens to be a picture that the Navy used quite frequently, and it happens to be one of BF-3's aircraft ready to take off. You can tell it was 3 because the diagonal stripe on the tail, which was our identification. When you get over the target, you want to find your boys, and if you're from a different group where you have a different looking tail, you might have a vertical stripe or a horizontal stripe or an X, but ours was a diagonal. This is a picture of the Yorktown underway, taken by somebody a long time ago. The piece of wood on the bottom an airline friend of mine probably took this picture, and he got quite a few pieces of the deck, and he uses them. He's quite a photographer as well as an airline pilot, and his father was on the Yorktown, and that's why he's so close to it. And I happened to meet him, and he and I talked back and forth, and this was a letter from him. And occasionally I get a letter from him or a phone call from Honolulu or Barcelona or somewhere in the world. When we went over on the Lexington and started home, the Air Force had lost a general in B-25s out there, so they had us looking for him for a while until we got out of range of where he was supposed to have gone down, and we never found any debris of that. But we were, of course, on board for several days before we got to Honolulu, and then from Honolulu on to Bremerton, Washington. So we had time to create this sort of yearbook. It had pictures taken by our photographer pilot of various missions we'd been on and islands, and then the boy that was talented enough to do the cover, he did the pictures, and he was just that good. I don't know if he became a cartoonist or what. I never saw him again, but he was instrumental in this. And we also wrote a book of our experiences. There were 6 of us, myself and 5 others, that took different sections of our trip out there and wrote it up, and everybody got a copy of that. And our house burned in the 50s, and I lost all of this stuff, so the other guys created the copies for me so that I have it. And several people have read the book and wanted copies, and a lady friend of mine who shall remain nameless, she's still a friend of mine, but her husband died a year or 2 ago. Cut it out. No, I introduced her to a friend of mine from Pontiac who was unmarried, and the 2 of them have hit it off nicely for about a year and a half so far. I don't know how much more it will last, but I told him, I said, if I was your age, do you think I'd be introducing you to her? I'd save her for myself.
That is correct.
Is a picture that was given to me. It was taken near a museum in California, and it's my understanding that it's the only place you would find all 3 of these flyable. The bottom one is a Japanese Zero. The middle one is the dear old Hellcat, which we flew off the Yorktown, and the top one is the Corsair, which was used land-based in World War II. But that's the only 3 that they say that are flyable in one place.
That is,
First airplane that we started to learn to be Navy pilots in. They are called Stearmans or N2S. They were made by Boeing. The biplane, open cockpit, 90 miles an hour, very maneuverable, good airplane to learn aerobatics and formation flying. The Navy paid $9,000 a piece for these, and I suppose the Air Force too. The bluish ones are the Air Force, and the yellow ones are the Navy, and indicates training planes. The Navy, and I presume the Air Force, sold them after the war at the same price, $500 a piece. I should have bought 5 or 6. Today they would sell for 70 to 80,000, and there are oodles of them around. They fly into Galesburg every Labor Day week. They'll get 50 to 100 of them in there from all over the country, and Canadian ones also. I was over there a couple years ago, ran into a barnstormer type crop duster from New Orleans, and he took me for a ride. And of course the engines are different. They were 2 1/4 horse back when I learned to fly in them. They're 350 now, and they have controllable pitch props where we had a wooden fixed prop, and they have radio in, and we had no radio, but they're still a nice airplane. Very serviceable. This is my old original VF-3 fighter squadron in training with the old blue Hellcats at Pasco, Washington. There were 36 airplanes and 48 pilots back then, and that's what we started out with, and before we ever got on the Yorktown.
amazing.
We left Pasco and went to California to pick up the Essex to take us out to the Hawaiian area, and then we were about 3 months at various spots in the Hawaiian area training and flying that good old converted Hellcat. And of course they were that blue top, whitish underneath back then, and then they switched to the newer ones, the F6, F5, which was dark blue, and that's what most of the war was used.
Now we're going.
We're going. Oh, this is poetry that has to do with flying, and probably some of the boys have used this with their obituary, and I probably will too. This is a little saying I got from a lady friend of mine that I met out in the Hawaiian Islands. She and her husband, who was an Air Force, who was 4 years old when we first met, is now 76, and she still sends me a Christmas card and a birthday card. And usually we talk on my birthday. She's just a
Sweet.
wonderful gal. This is my autobiography, Naturally, it's good because I wrote it. This is a thank you from a dissertation I gave to the witness for war, which would be sort of an expose of my time in service. Pictures of the Yorktown, where it is anchored in South Carolina. Me in the cockpit of a Cougar jet. A VF-3 airplane about to take off from the Yorktown. Good old Hellcat. You can buy models of them. There they are. This is a recap of the activity of the Yorktown during World War II, the number of gallons of fuel it consumed and the number of airplanes that were shot down from it, and number of miles it traveled and so on. Picture of some of my flying buddies at the time while we were out in the Hawaiian area. This is probably taken by the Royal Hawaiian, and of course we wouldn't recognize the Royal Hawaiian if it wasn't pink, and all the nice grounds around it are now buildings, and it's just nestled in there among all the buildings. Unfortunately, there isn't much land left. This was one of the early airplanes aboard carriers. You see, that's an open cockpit biplane, and that was made by Grumman also. I think it was called an F-3F. It preceded the one which was active when war started, the F-4F Wildcat. More different World War II aircraft, jets that came along after World War II. More poetry. This was taken last year at the reunion. Two friends of mine, one of them a son-in-law. That's my discharge, in case you weren't sure. That's apparently my birth certificate. The good old Yorktown. Play money that we carried in case you got shot down over China or Japan. Buy your way out. More of the same. This is a card from a gentleman I met. He was the last living Medal of Honor winner from Pearl Harbor. And he died a couple of years ago. His name was John W. Finn. And you'd find his picture and recap in the Hall of Medal of Honor winners on the Yorktown. Whole bunch of military airplanes. Probably been a U.S. stamp made for each of them. Couldn't get them all on one picture, two pictures of them. It's a little saying by one of the preachers aboard. my stripes. Picture of a guy I knew from Illinois that was in our squadron, and he put his plane in the drink, got a wave off coming aboard, too fast or too slow, poured the coal to it and just went right on over. He spent 50 years looking for the ship people that picked him up, and finally, after 50 years, found that they were having a ship reunion in St. Louis, and he went down there to see them and give them one more thank you.
Who drew that?
This is my friend that you had a picture of earlier. He and I flew together, and this was during the time that he stayed in and became a ship captain, and then he retired and became a charter aircraft pilot.
Who drew the spoons?
What?
Who drew the spoons?
That is my friend that spent the 50 years, and this was in celebration of his 50 years with his mama
That's cute.
down in Marion, Illinois. There's my friend that became the charter pilot. This is a Hellcat that's preserved aboard the Yorktown. This is a plaque that's got my name on it. My girlfriend paid to have that hung in the Yorktown.
How nice of her to do that for you.
Isn't it?
And all the other.
At that time, she thought I was worth $250. That's $250, not $2.50.
We thought that was nice. You could splurge a whole $250 for you.
Right now, it'd probably be $2.50. Yeah. That's a picture of my wife and I
What kind of,
just before we left the States for out west.
what kind of car is that?
That's a terraplane. Never heard of it, did you?
No.
Hudson terraplane?
Oh, Hudson.
Okay. How you like that?
Man. Look at that.
Corsair, Panther, SPD. I flew them all. Here's my boys up in Glenview in the reserve. This is a letter I got from a historian. He's now deceased, but he wrote a book about the Yorktown, and Clark Reynolds was his name. His wife is still a good acquaintance of mine, and she and a night fighter pilot are now seeing each other. This is a story about one of our pilots who got the fuse of an anti-aircraft shell embedded in his skull over Saigon, French Indochina. It blinded him. He couldn't read the instruments, and his wingman talked him back to the Yorktown, 100 and some miles, and talked him aboard, and he landed, and our flight surgeon took that fuse out, which was as big as your thumb, was blinding him, and he can see, or could.
So let me get this straight. The wingman
Flew
for
him back.
100 miles said wing up or wing down or whatever, and got him to land on the carrier too, as well? Wow.
Talked him aboard.
Were you on that mission too, or?
I was up there, but
Yeah.
I wasn't in the same group.
Wow.
No,
That's amazing, huh?
really.
Yeah.
Some of our boys gathered together out in the Hawaiian area. This was our air group commander. He's the only one with a glass in his hand, I believe. The others were all thinking about it, and I'm back there too. This is a guy I flew with quite frequently and lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and he's got his hands in a hole in the fuselage, landed back, and unbeknownst to him at that time, that same shell not only made that hole, but damaged one of his control cables, and it was hanging instead of by 50 strings of wire, maybe 2 or 3. So he was lucky to get back to board. And this is his obituary. And there, my lady friend that you had a picture of earlier. Here I am in St. Louis with the winter gear on in front of the biplane, open cockpits.
Wow.
This was December, and it gets cold in St. Louis, and I froze my nose, and my nose is ample.
What year was that?
42. Here's 2 pictures of yours truly. One out in California before we left for the South Pacific, and one out in New Jersey after I got back and reformed. I lived near Atlantic City for a while. There's the Yorktown.
Now that picture you just showed, that's pretty similar to what it
Pretty
looked like
much
when you were.
the way.
Yeah.
These are pictures of offspring of some of our old boys. They were sort of prolific, I think. This is the one that he and I got credit for, the first one shot down, and he's about 99 there. His wife is still alive. See, he sent me a card every Christmas, always with his own picture on it.
Look at that.
That's my wife and I. I was a cadet yet then, but of course we weren't married then, because at that time, why, you couldn't be married and be a cadet. Now most of them are officers going through. And there you got that picture before. I like that picture.
Yes, you do.
Good.
But this is the Distinguished Flying Cross. This is the Air Medal, and the star is the second one in lieu of another medal. And then these are area engagements, and the stars there are different war areas, like 3 or 4 in the Philippines or that. I was a delegate to the American Legion Convention in the great state of Illinois.
And that's a button?
That's a button off of my uniform, and this was my senior lieutenant collar emblems. The other one's on my hat. This tells my story shortly. This is the Yorktown again. Felix the Cat again. These are the various pocket cards for altitude, chamber tests, some other test I've forgotten.
Certification cards.
Physiological, instrument card, commercial pilot card.
Oh.
My original Navy ID card.
I saw.
More pictures of the group while we were in the Hawaiian area. More airplanes. Some Air Force. Flying boat from the Navy. Corsair with my signature on too. I don't know how it got there. That's what I looked like when I was a cadet.
Amazing.
Had hair.
Dang good looking.
No wonder, you know, wings and uniform, yum yum.
Yep.
This is a picture they took out at the Yorktown. Looks pretty good for whoever it is.
Yep. You don't know who that is?
I never saw him before except when I shave.
Hello.
Pilot cockpit maps made out of silk. The only way they'd hold up, you know, if you got wet.
Really?
They give you the wind direction, waves, and that for different climate. In case you get shot down, why it doesn't float away.
Right?
More airplane pictures. Stamps with airplanes. The Yorktown where it is now.
Okay.
More pocket cards.
Yep. There's Felix again.
Reunion.
So what reunion is this year? What reunion is this year for the Yorktown?
What?
What reunion? What number reunion is this year?
64, I think.
64.
This is 08 and was 60th.
Okay.
So it's got to be more than that.
66?
Yeah.
Because you do them every other year, right?
No,
Or was it every year?
Every year.
Gotcha.
No, our squadron was every other year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. This lady sends me a Christmas card and a birthday card, and her father was in our squadron, and her father and mother were good friends of mine. I have never met the lady, and still, I talked to her on the phone once, but she sends me a card all the time.
That's nice.
It's gotta be a nice soothing connection for her.
See, I'm good to people. That's the old banker in me. This guy and his wife and their kids, they're both gone. He was a Pan Am pilot afterwards, and his wife and he were good acquaintances all the time. And he became a millionaire.
Oh, wow.
And here they are. This is the lady that I met out in Hawaii early, and her husband was an Air Force pilot. These are her 3 daughters, and this is the one that still sends me a card. More old folks. I think this was last year, 2014. That's pretty close.
Yep. Look at that, man.
This is the Tuskegee Airmen. Did you ever hear of them?
Yeah.
The black ones?
Yep.
These 3 were up at Joliet Junior 2 or 3 years ago. One of my daughters works up there. She's a secretary to the dean of students, and she called me and said, "Dad, the Tuskegee Airmen are going to be here." It was a Black History Month in February, I believe.
Yep.
And she says, "Can you come up?" And I said, "Sure." So I did, and I got to meet those guys, and believe it or not, they wanted their picture taken with a Navy pilot.
Were they okay, or were they?
Yeah,
you know?
you'd think they'd be smarter than that, wouldn't you? And here that picture is. Look at,
That's really neat.
yeah. Me and the Tuskegee Airmen. They put pictures in the Morse paper all the time, and my oldest daughter put all these. This guy and I have been friends since 5th grade, and he was an Air Force colonel, and this is a son-in-law, and this is a granddaughter's husband, and this is old you-know-who. And there's Mama and I currently.
Cute.
She and I have been together 18 years.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think we'll,
You know, maybe
Well-
stay together for a while.
oh, we're not gonna quit dating. No.
Good.
These are pictures from the Yorktown. See, they eat and drink out there always.
I'll bet you they do a lot of that.
Some of them more than others.
Yeah.
This is one of the girls that has worked out there for a long time. It's not a very good picture of her, but she's a mainstay. This is the one I said that done. Her husband is a airplane salesman, but she's just a wonderful gal. This is my 4th daughter. She isn't, but she and I go to lunch every 2 weeks. Her birthday is the same day as my daughter that passed away 3 years ago.
Oh.
And she and I met about the same time, and that's why we are together.
Isn't that cute?
And she has 2 daughters who enjoy birthdays the same as one of my daughters and one of her grandkids. So I think the Lord threw us together
Yeah.
for some reason.
Yeah.
I haven't found it out yet.
Besides having nice lunches together, I'm sure there's something more.
Can't tell, it might get better.
You never know.
You're nasty. This is the Stearmans that come into Galesburg all the time,
Do you go to that show?
generally.
I gotta ask you, do you ever go to Oshkosh?
I've been there oodles of
Yeah, it's
times.
pretty neat, isn't
Isn't
it?
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, all
We go
those
every year.
models.
Yeah.
Yeah, they always have some old aircraft flying.
Warbirds area. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my daughters always loved to go, and I thought one of them would become a pilot
Mhm.
because she was so gung-ho,
Yeah.
but she didn't. There they are again. You've seen it.
Wow.
Art, thank you for
Thank you so much.
a wonderful morning.
Yeah.
No charge. on my back, and I thought, oh God, I've been hit and it doesn't hurt. So I reached back there, came back, cold sweat.
Lucky.
Made me feel good.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you were flying Hellcats, right?
Hellcats.
Okay. And that was
44 and 5.
okay.
You weren't a twinkle in your
No,
father's eye.
no, I don't even think my dad was born in 47 after my grandpa got home from the war, so he wasn't really around either. So.
Yeah, my oldest daughter was born in 46.
Okay.
I had one 46, 49, and 54.
Okay.
And then I married a girl who was born in 54.
Okay.
This was our insignia, and then this was the dive bombers, and this was the Torpeckers torpedo.
Would they have that painted on all of your?
No,
No.
you wore it on
your jacket. Okay.
was all just an emblem. But Felix the Cat is the oldest insignia in the Navy.
Is it really?
1924.
Okay.
And it's still in use.
Huh.
During World War II, it was our group, 3, 6, which was Butch O'Hare, and 31. And 31 followed 3 and is still active.
Wow.
And they still use Felix.
It's pretty neat.
And I have Felix on the back porch as a wind chime. right there. Can you see?
Yeah,
That it?
yep.
Okay.